Okay, now we are live and recording on eChurch Live on this Monday. Where are we? June the 22nd, right? Monday, June 22nd. And this is a weekend when there's been some uh, volatility with race again in America. And one of the positive things that we saw this past week was after such a horrible thing was that we saw people expressing forgiveness, which isn't always easy to do, but expressing the Christian expression of forgiveness and love. And we didn't see rioting this time.
Right.
And we've been talking a lot about the unconditional love of God and how really it's the Spirit of God that enables people to do it. So that's why I believe it's only a Christian or someone that knows God that way. Has the capacity to really operate big enough in the love of God to actually absorb the wrongdoing like that. Even though things can hurt, and it's not always easy, but we can because God is that big, and we've been talking about how big God's love is. Also, this was Father's Day yesterday, and I had a great Father's Day. I could just make a long list of all the wonderful things that I received and that we did and people did for me yesterday. My wife was very, very good to me. But let me tell you a little story. My personal Father's Day story, my Father's Day message. My Father's Day message is different than a lot of other ministers will bring on Father's Day a lot of times. But the story with me and my dad wasn't the Norman Rockwell upbringing. It felt like it started out that way very much because my dad was my hero. I felt like he was Superman. I thought he was the smartest man in the world. I thought he was the best man in the world. Just loved Daddy as I was a boy growing up. But some things happened when I became a young teen with our broken family, and my dad made some choices that really hurt me and hurt my siblings, where we felt like he had rejected us and chosen another family over us. And so there was a lot of hurt and pain, and it did a lot of things. I made a lot of bad choices with that hurt and that pain as a teenager, and then even as a young man. Made very destructive choices for myself. Lived a very hard and wild and selfish lifestyle. It was very ugly, and I was lucky to live through it. But me and Daddy didn't see each other for a few years. And when I did try to reconnect with him, we were cordial to each other. And I actually came and began to live with him when I was about 18 years old, and he was going to help me get into college. And I hadn't, seen him in years. And of course, he wanted to give me discipline and structure, and I wasn't used to that because after I felt like I was deserted by him, I kind of felt like I just made my own choices after that, and they weren't good choices, but they were mine, and I was used to just doing what I wanted to do. Whatever I wanted to do, that's where I did. If I wanted to go somewhere, I did. I mean, I was too big and mean and wild for my mama to handle me, so I just did whatever I wanted to. And now I'm with this man, and he's wanting to put me under discipline and structure, and I'm like, hey, you didn't care about me for the last few years, and now you want to tell me what to do? No. And so we butted heads a lot, and we almost came to a fist fight at one point. I mean, we called each other outside, and came that close, and it scared me so bad I left, and didn't see him again for another few years. And so where Daddy was once my hero, now he had become my enemy, and it was like we despised each other. Well, a few years later, I was now grown and married and had gotten saved, and my heart and my life had changed, and I had been changed by the wonderful, big, unconditional love of God. I felt like I was loved, and I loved everybody, and so anyway, um, uh, moved my family down close to where my dad lived, and So began to see him again, began to reconnect. And now we're grown men, and we've sort of pushed those things behind us. So we were cordial to each other. We didn't hug, we shook hands. We were very nice to each other, but I could tell he was very tentative about drawing near to me because we had all this history in this past, and he knew that he had hurt me and all that. So he was very tentative in that. But over some time, I continued to come around and reach out, and he saw that I loved him, and he saw that I wasn't holding anything against him, and he saw that he didn't owe me anything. He owed me no apologies. He owed me no anything because he had been totally forgiven, because I had been totally forgiven by God. And he that has received mercy has mercy to give. And that's why the message of God's grace in the gospel is so important for people to have a clear understanding of, because that when you can relate to God properly, it causes you to relate to the world properly. And it really brings a heavenly experience to you. That's when you have love and peace and joy. And that's heavenly, no matter what your situations are. So he saw that. He saw that I was a different man, and he saw that I didn't care about any of the past. He saw that none of that mattered to me, and I just took him as he is, and I loved him the way he is. And it worked on him. It changed him. The Bible speaks of how it will draw others to the Lord when they see your open lifestyle. And my daddy, who at the time, for so many years, he was a hard New Age intellectual, and thought he knew all the answers, and thought all churches were scams and all preachers were crooks, and now I'm a pastor. And pretty soon, Daddy gets saved. And now he's experienced the unconditional love of God. And Daddy's life began to change, and he actually, became a part of my church and was helping with my church. And at one point, I would really say that he was probably my best evangelist for a while, as far as inviting people to church. That was my dad. And me and Dad got real close, and we became really close and good friends and fishing buddies and confidants, and it was wonderful. And I look back on that now. He died a few years ago, but I look back on that now, and I'm so grateful for the unconditional love of God, because I got to enjoy my dad for so many of his later years in life and in my adult life, and got to enjoy the same man that was once my hero when I was younger. And that couldn't have happened if I didn't have that love of God in my heart, if I didn't have that unconditional love. It was so big that even in his later years, and when the past would come up in just our conversations, when we would be talking about old times or something, and the past would come up, I noticed a lot of times that he had changed history in his own mind. It happened a lot better in his mind than it did in mine, and he really changed the facts when he would retell it. And I just let him do it, because he didn't owe me anything, and all I wanted was for the old man to have his peace, at that time in his life and in that age, because I loved him, and I loved him unconditionally, and I was in no way hurt by him, because that's what the unconditional love of God does. The unconditional love of God is big enough that it can absorb the wrongdoing, it can absorb the pain, it can absorb the unfairness, and it doesn't demand any recompense, and it doesn't have to have balance and justification to make things right. The love of God is big enough to overshadow anything, and it makes things right. That's what he did with us. He absorbed all of our wrongdoing and all of our sin, and without any payment from us, without any balancing of the scales in that sense, other than he did it on his own. He absorbed it himself. He paid for it himself and took care of it, and he didn't demand anything from us. And that shows how big his love is. And God absorbed all that. And God hasn't been emotionally scarred by all the wrong that we've done, all the bad things we've done in his name, all the defying of God that has gone on through mankind. God has not been emotionally scarred by that. He could take it on because love is the one perfect thing that never fails, cannot be dominated, bears everything, endures everything, because it's supernatural and it's very, very big. And that's the one thing that works in this world. The Bible says love never fails. It seems like even as Christians, we want to try every other kind of thing, and everything else will fail at some point. But there's one thing that doesn't, and that's the one thing that we can always rely on. And it's the most beautiful thing, and it works. That's my Father's Day story, a story of reconciliation and restoration that's only and always made possible by the perfect heart of God, the perfect love of God. And that's what we have as Christians. That can make everything right. It'll deal with the race problem in the world. It really will. That's the answer. It's from the inside out. It's people knowing God and knowing this love of God and having confidence in it. You know, I could have done it another way. I could have done it the world's way and went and went and demanded certain things from him and might have gotten it. And might have gotten it. And I might have felt there's a part of me, there was a flesh, there would have been a selfish part of me that would have felt good because I would have needed a selfish thing about me to be appeased and to be justified, and that's as far as it would have got. But we would have never had the depth of the relationship and the love that we had for each other without that love of God. And I love how it's so big, and how even when these people were shot in that church, you know, one of the first words I read that they had spoken to the killer was, "I forgive you." And I'm sure it's not easy, but they said, "I forgive you." And remember how we were reading about, or we were hearing how, you know, there was another family member, and he says, you know, for me, really, forgiveness hasn't come yet. That's going to be a work in progress for me. He says, because I'm not there. I just can't get that yet. He said, if it were an accident, I could do it, but this was cold-blooded and premeditated. So I can't forgive that yet. And even though he wanted to, but he was being honest with his feelings. And we were talking earlier about how, you know, if somebody does it accidentally and you say, "I forgive you," it kind of is forgiveness on one level, but really it's not, because if someone does something accidentally, they deserve it. They deserve forgiveness because they didn't mean to do anything. But if somebody does something on purpose to harm you, they don't deserve it. And that's when forgiveness comes on, because it's giving something. To give something means that you don't get payment back for it. You might not get the apology. The person may never acknowledge that they're wrong. Mm-hmm. They may never get justice for it. They might get off scot-free for what they've done to you, and seemingly look like they've had no no recompense or no recourse for their actions. And it drives the flesh of man crazy, because we demand balance, we demand fairness, we demand justice. The love of God is better than fair. It's bigger than fair. It overshadows all fair, and it doesn't even have to be fair, because it's big enough to make everybody happy. Mm-hmm. And so when we're talking about forgiveness, which really comes by the unconditional love of God, we're talking about for giving something, to give something before, mm-hmm. not to give something when it's deserved, not to give something when they get it right, when they apologize. I've had to forgive people that I probably will never get an apology for them. Mm-hmm. And if I'm going to wait for them to apologize, mm-hmm. I'm still going to be burning and hurting and tormented over those things. But if you give it to them before, mm-hmm. then it's over. It's been absorbed and it's done, and there's no more issue about it. Mm-hmm. Any comments?
No. I was going to say, one thing that I noticed in my own life when I've been harmed unwrongly or unjustly is, you know, one person harms, the other person is harmed. They want to harm back, which harms this one who wants to harm back, which harms this one. So there's always a never-ending issue, problem.
It's been going on since Cain killed Abel.
Right. And so the only way for that back and forth to stop is for one person,
Yeah.
one of them, to say, it'll stop with me. Now, in my own life, what I noticed about the harms done to me was it actually caused problems in myself. It resulted in self-destructive
Yeah.
behavior.
And you didn't even ask for it. I mean, it was done wrongly to you. You didn't even deserve it. Really.
But it's weird how it came out as, you know, I guess some people would just build up with anger and go try to hurt someone else. But it almost seemed like it actually went into myself, where I learned how to treat myself in a self-destructive way. And I've seen it in other cultures as well, where they've been harmed, but there's been no healing, and all it does is bring self-destruction on themselves. And you think that you're going to fix it by calling out the person, you know, getting strong enough to confront the person. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I'm saying that that doesn't actually, or let me just say, in my own experience, it didn't solve the problem. Really, only God, in my experience, can solve the hurt and the problem that's on the inside. And I can hold that person responsible for it, but that's not going to solve my issue. So to me, the forgiveness helped me. And like you said, a lot of people, they don't even know I forgave them. They don't even know, they've never even admitted doing anything wrong. But I am healthier inside, and I'm not burning with anger or just frustration because of the choices that they made towards me. I am free. And the truth is, for me, when I came to know grace, I no longer wanted to be the Christian group who was separate from everyone else and who had all the right answers to everything. I had this overwhelming love for lost people. And I didn't want to fight them. And I didn't want to be angry to tell them how wrong they were and that, you know, they were going to hell if they didn't change. And I get that some people feel like that's a loving thing to do, but I just felt like if I extended love, there was more of an opportunity for change on their end than there was for me righteously standing for God. And one of the reasons why I believe that is because from my own life, I believe that's what changed my heart, was people who knew the grace of God, were willing to be around me when I was a mess and I was hurting people. I wasn't hurting them purposely or anything, but I was just so unhealthy and so sick inside that I, without even realizing, would hurt people by things I said, by actions I took. And there seemed like there were always people around me who were willing to absorb those sort of errors that I was making.
They were big enough.
They were big enough. And some of them even stopped being around me. We're like, okay, that's enough. But then there were other people that stepped in. But I found that by being around people like that, it felt an inviting, and it felt, I don't know, like it gave me a room to change. Like you said with your dad, that he seemed to change when he noticed that you weren't going to fight him and that you weren't going to...
I didn't hold anything against him. So then he felt like he was free to draw near to his son again.
Yeah.
And he did. And that's exactly what we do with the Father. That's what happens is that we're able to draw near to him when we know how much he really loves us.
I really like what you said about forgiveness. I've never thought of it that way, but before it's deserved, you give grace. You give before it's deserved or asked for. And I've had that experience from God, really from other people too, but especially from God. And I have a desire to extend that.
Remember, in the old covenant, it wasn't that way. You had to do this. You had to make the sacrifice. You had to make the recompense. You had to do something, and then you were absolved.
Mm-hmm.
And so finally, he puts an end to all that. He says, "I'm not going to make a covenant with you like that. I want to make a new covenant, my covenant with you, and I'm going to take all that stuff out of the way,
Mm-hmm.
and everything will be forgiven." I love what 2 Corinthians 5 says, that God is not holding the world's sins against them. The
Mm-hmm.
world. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people still don't even like God,
Mm-hmm.
but He's not holding it. He gave it to them before. He gave it to all of us before. That is so clear that that's the nature, the heartbeat of God.
Mm-hmm.
And those who know Him and know Him that way, the book of First John says, has this agape love or unconditional love, and he that has that, they only have that because they know God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what will change the world. This is how we win in all situations. It's not political power
Mm-hmm.
or any other kind of power. We got some comments.
Yes, Colorado 746 says, I think unforgiveness of one person can set up a habit of harboring unforgiveness to others. It feeds on itself.
Hmm.
It hardens your heart so that you hold more and more unforgiveness to more and more people.
That's really interesting, because I think that you're right, because it becomes your way,
Mm-hmm.
or it is your way, until you learn to do it. And really, and let's say this: when we're saying that, we're talking about this thing, unforgiveness and the unconditional love of God. But you know how people say they know they should do it, but they just can't, or it's very, very hard, because it is in the flesh. In fact, it seems like to me it's impossible. But when you know God, this is why the preaching of the grace of God, the goodness of God, the love of God is so important, because when people know that,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes something that becomes more automatic in their character.
Yeah.
He's that received love has love to give. It wasn't until I knew how much God loved me, like decades after I was saved, when I knew how much God loved me, that I entered in to a graceful walk, a
Mm-hmm.
graceful life.
Mm-hmm.
And I quit being a man pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
I became a man and woman lover, a person lover, instead of a person pleaser, for the sake of, because my pleasing then used to be for their approval, or their backslap, or their validation in some way, their friendship sometimes. And so I would do that, and so I was always conscious of how I looked and how I appeared to people, and will people believe in me? Will people follow me? And am I doing a good job with my with my preaching? So that, anyway, they were a lot of selfish motives, because that was the best that I had. But when I knew that God loved me, it wasn't about me anymore. It was all about everybody else. And now there's an automatic thing that flows to where when you know the grace of God in this way, you feel like you've got it together. You feel like you've got everything you need. So you're not needy, and you're not needing things from other things or other people. So there you're free to just love and to bless. You're not demanding things from people. You're not demanding apologies. You're not even demanding that they be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
You're not demanding perfection anyway. And God doesn't do that. He forgives. He gives us that grace and that love beforehand, because He knows how it works. That love changes our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
When I loved my dad that way, it changed his heart.
Mm-hmm.
When people extended that love and that grace to you, it changed your heart.
Right.
This is how it works. And so we have these people whose families were victims of these shootings, and as they extend grace outwardly, it has an effect that way. Notice there were no riots on this one. This was definitely, if the others were questionable, this was not questionable. This was a racial thing. This man killed for a racial reason.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was, to me, it was more blatant than a lot of the other stories that have been in the news in recent months.
Mm-hmm.
where things were claimed to be racial, and maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But this one was definitely racial. And because they didn't inflame it with the flesh, but chose to try to do it the way that they were taught by their pastor to love, we didn't see the riots, and we didn't see all the demonstrations of anger, even though there's pain. I mean, people lost their families. It's not an easy thing, but and life is not always easy. There's pain around here, but like you say, you found that the best way to navigate this world, where there is pain, where there is unfairness,
and really where there's free choice, because that
Yeah.
guy, he was extended forgiveness. That may or may not have any impact on him, but there's a possibility that it will. Whereas if there was no forgiveness extended, there is no possibility of change to happen.
and you said
But it's freedom. He has the option.
yeah.
That's freedom.
Yeah. And the point I was making was that you said the best way to navigate this world, where there is choice, where people can do what they want to do, they do have that freedom. And and as much as people would like to control everybody, they don't and they can't. So the best way to navigate this world, where they can be mean to you, they can misunderstand you, they can be unfair. The best way to navigate this world is with God's unconditional love. I borrowed that from you.
Oh, from my blog?
Yes, from your blog.
We saw a movie probably a year ago, Philomena, with
I love
Dame
it.
Judi Dench. And it was a story of a woman who she'd been raised in a convent, taken from her parents. I can't remember all the details
But
of
she
it.
was abused there.
But she was abused, and it was seriously wrong. And anyway, this reporter, was he from America?
I think
She was
I
from
think so.
England. Anyway, he wanted to help her find the truth about what had happened to her, where it had happened, who was involved, who was to blame. And he really helped her along the way to find, to get to the bottom of it all. And towards the end of the movie, he asks her what she's going to do, and she says, "I'm going to forgive him."
Well, and she met the mother superior there, or whatever, that had
Who was
been abusing
responsible,
her,
yeah.
and gave her the opportunity to apologize. And she was even harder than before. She's like, "No, you deserved it. You were a devil's child. You
Yeah.
were mean. You were,
Yeah. And the reporter guy, he said, "What are you going to do?" And she said, "I'm going to forgive." And he said, "What? Like,
just like that."
just like that? You're just going to forgive and let her get off scot-free?" And she said, "No, not just like that. It's not easy. It's not easy." She goes, "But I don't want to be like you. I don't want to end up like you."
Yeah.
Which is like, that
Yeah.
hate and desire for revenge and
And
wanting
he was
to.
so bitter and stressed
He was
and
bitter, yeah.
and critical, and she was watching him the whole time. She thought, "This is one thing I don't want to be," and it was that part right there was worth. I was surprised. I didn't know I was going to like that movie. It was wonderful.
Yeah, you didn't think you were going to like it,
No.
and it turned out to be the one you liked the
Turned out
best.
to be the one I liked. Yeah, it was real good. But that was it. I loved. She said, "No, not just like that, because it's not just something you just flippantly do." She said, "It's hard." She said, "But I don't want to be like you, so this is what I choose to do with our freedom of choice." And that's another point too, with this freedom of choice. The Christian actually has more choice because we have the option of this love. We have
Right.
it. And that's good news to the hearer, because sometimes you feel like it's too hard for me. But if you know what you got, if you know who you are and who loves you, and
And
you're aware of that love, it really does become easier.
And if you don't, it really doesn't make sense. And it does look counterintuitive, and it does look silly, or, like you're getting away with something, but it's not. And yeah.
It really is. The love of God is the answer. That's where the restoration and the reconciliation is, and that's the one thing that heals and restores and make things right. It is that which is perfect. 1 Corinthians 13. Do a study. Look up the word perfect in the Bible, in the New Testament, and look it up. And I would say virtually everywhere it's mentioned, it's in the context of the unconditional love of God. That and that alone is perfect.
That's good.
Anything else?
No, doesn't look like any more comments.
Any other comments or prayer requests? We're talking about how big is God's love. Any questions about this? When we're out speaking, we get lots of questions and about it because people, it's because it's not easy.
Oh, it's really not easy.
One person was like, I don't get it. What if someone's doing this? And I'm like, I know. But the book of Ephesians says that it's the love of God that passes knowledge. So it's supernatural, it's extra earthly, it's bigger than all the things of this world. And I really believe that's why Jesus would say, in the world you have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. In the world you have tribulation, but in me there's peace. When I learned of the grace of God, I didn't just get a doctrine that okay, I'm off the hook now. I can act any way, any old ugly way, and it's all just as good, it's all fine. I didn't get a doctrine of that, and I didn't just get. It wasn't to me just a message of salvation by grace rather than works. I knew that really, in a sense, but in my heart, I still had this works thing because I really didn't know how much God loved me, so I couldn't see how he could love me that way. But when God's Spirit is the one that reveals these things to us. And when I got the revelation of how good God was, when I saw that his grace, that it was by grace and grace alone, that it was all about him and it had nothing to do with me, my works, my ability, my trying harder or anything else, that it was a free gift, I thought, wow, what kind of love really is this? And I saw how big his love was for me. And I just took it in. And I felt it, I embraced it, and I knew that God loved this guy no matter what, without any limitations. And it went beyond my knowledge. It almost, it felt like it blew my mind. It just went, whoosh. It's like, wow, this is big. But when I did take it in, when I took that leap that we've talked about sometime, and I took that leap and I took it in, I became gracious, much like him. And that is a wonderful place to be, a wonderful way of living, this graceful, gracious way of living to where you're honestly feeling love for everyone you come into contact with. Honestly. And it's not that you're oblivious to faults and flaws and sins and wrongdoings. You see them, but your love is bigger than all of that. And not that there's not times when you want to sit somebody down and say, hey, this is really taking you the wrong way. But you know that you're loving them the whole time. You never have a question about, is this love what I'm doing? You know that you're loving them the whole time because you're honestly experiencing it and feeling it. And it changes. It changed me from the inside, and then in my realm of influence, it begins to change other people. And this is how we see people drawn to the goodness of God, and it causes us to be a showcase of God's goodness and a trophy of his grace. And there's nothing bigger than the love of God. I hear people sometimes say that, yeah, love is good, but we also need this. And I'm like, oh gosh, you've got no idea how big it is. This love encompasses everything. It is so big and so powerful. Okay, we'll go ahead and start wrapping things up.
I wanted you to just say a little bit, because we've been talking about the South Carolina thing. If you want to say a little bit about the difference between the law, the civil law, and God's law, like we always get the comment, well, what, are you just going to forgive and let them you know what I mean, get away? It's not that. There's
Oh
still
no,
the
they don't. One
civil
doesn't really
law.
have anything to do with the other. I mean, you've got the the laws of the land that have ways of dealing with those things. It's not that. I mean, like this guy, he gets arrested. He's either going to be killed or spend the rest of his life in prison. So all that's going to happen. That doesn't really even heal a heart. I'm amazed when I hear that. I know people feel like they get a sense of closure. People like to go to court and their attacker, get the book thrown at them. They get a sense of closure. It does something. It appeases the flesh in some ways, what it does, but it never really heals the heart at all. It's that flesh that cries out for justice, and the flesh that just says, I want some fairness here, some sense of fairness. And so we have these civil laws that do that. But the love of God is something that, I believe it's separate from all that. The love of God is the love of God, no matter what. And the love of God is big enough to cause you to forgive. One of my favorite stories about that is the man who was a principal of a school, and his son was killed in the cafeteria in a fight with another boy in school that killed him. And as he held his dying boy in his arms, and as his boy died in his arms, the Spirit of God immediately began to speak to him and minister to him. And he said, and he's saying, Lord, what am I going to do? And he says, you're going to forgive. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to forgive your son's killer. And he did. And he said he was able to do that. He said the Lord just started healing his heart, and this forgiveness started flowing. And he went on the Oprah Winfrey show, and because he had some things to say to the man, and when he saw the man's face and spoke to him for the first time since that killing, he said, there's some things I've been wanting to tell you for a long time. He said, I want you to know that I love you, and God loves you, and I forgive you, and God forgives you, and not I nor God is holding anything against you right now. You are free from that. And he said, and you're going to get out of there someday. And he said, I want you to come to me. He said, because I want to help you to be the man that God, wants you to be. He said, I want to help you get an education, go to college and all that. He said, my son's gone. He said, but I can help you, and I can love you. And of course Oprah's jaw was dropped, and everybody was like, they couldn't believe it, And at first they started throwing comments at him like, that's unrealistic. You're not facing reality. You're in denial. You've got to go through the process, and you've got to deal with this, and there's got to be justice, and there's got to be all this. Well, the guy was in prison, but he didn't care about justice himself. The civil laws will take care of however they want to do with that. We'll abide by that. But in your own heart, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. Your own heart has to be freed. Your own heart has to be able to rejoice and have peace when you've been hurt, when you've been wronged, when there hasn't been justice in your life. And so your own heart has to be big enough to be able to rejoice and sing because you've overcome anything that's in the world. Mm-hmm. And that's what the love of God does for you. It gives you that heavenly experience, because if we didn't have that, we're all just going to go around wounded. We're all going to go around with these fears and these hurts and these walls around us and these issues just plaguing us all the time. And a lot of mankind, most mankind, it seems, does that. But there's a people in the earth that know their God. Daniel said those that know their God will be strong and do exploits. And those that know God in this way we're talking about, they're big enough to where the pains of this earth and the tribulations that Jesus spoke of, they don't overcome us, we overcome them. Paul said we glory in tribulations because we're big enough on the inside to be able to rejoice and to be free and to not hurt. The love of God is the only thing that can consume that hurt and throw it away, throw the sin, the wrongdoing, the unfairness, just take it all out of your heart and cause you to rise up and just be bigger than anything, because greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. It's the love of God that allows you to do that. You always look to forgive, always look to forgive, give it before, always look to operate in unconditional love. I promise you, you'll feel much better for it. It will empower you in your life, and it will set you up as the head and not the tail.
That's good.
Okay. Is that it for tonight?
I do not see any more comments.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to wrap this up. We will be on for a couple of minutes if you have any prayer requests or anything. And thank you guys for coming out on this wonderful Monday night. We love being with you. We love doing Eat Church with you, and hope that it's a blessing to you. Have a great night.
Oh wait, Colorado 746 had a comment. She said, my dad was abusive. It took me years to be able to forgive, but in the end, he came to the Lord and we started to have a wonderful relationship before he died.
Isn't that good?
And she said, amen.
Only God. The old saying, I really believe it's true, to err is human, but to forgive is divine. It really, really is divine. It's of the divine nature. Okay, God bless you guys. Have a good evening, and we're going to stop the recording now, but we will be hanging out for the next few minutes. If you have any other comments or questions or prayer requests. Good night.